Do you ever feel like God or God in His Word is sometimes so heavy that it chokes life out of you rather than gives you life or helps you experience life in God? I do. I think that happens sometimes when we misunderstand verses. Maybe because we've taken them out of context, or because we've only seen them in little memes, or because some experience that we've had when we heard a verse got tied to some kind of a meaning for us that wasn't what God meant or what God has for us. And we have to consider, scripture as a whole. And so sometimes when we're looking at specific scriptures, we can forget the whole of who God is and how vast He is and how amazing He is, and His overarching purposes and ways of being with us and relating to us. And so one that was coming to mind today is the concept of the joy of the Lord is my strength. And I've seen that meme. I've seen different like social media things that will, tout this, the joy of the Lord is my strength. And the way I see it and hear it is like, okay, well, this phrase is coming at me when I'm hurting, when I'm angry, when an injustice has happened, or maybe things have been stirred up in me from past stuff that is coming to the surface, and it looks like all I am is all these bad things. And so then I start feeling bad about myself, and then I start feeling like if I'm not joyful, then something's wrong with me, and I'm not obeying God enough because I don't get enough of the joy of the Lord is my strength, that it's not enough for me to just say and know and repeat to myself, the joy of the Lord is my strength. I should know this and I've got to do better in this. That scenario is when life is being choked out. It is not life being poured in. And when I look into scriptures and I look at some of the scripture verses, we're going to talk about a couple today, but also who God is as a whole and how He portrays His life throughout scripture and how He works in our lives, I believe that He came to give us life and life abundantly. And so when I think of joy, even when I was watching, the Inside Out movie, right, with these characters, joy kind of annoyed me a little bit because I was like, in the beginning at least, I was like, what? I don't always feel joyful, but then I'd feel guilty because if the joy of the Lord is my strength and I don't feel joyful, then something's wrong with me. Well, one of the things that I loved in that movie was you had this character, and when he was sad, sadness came and sat next to him, right? She was present in the sadness, in the hard time. And then joy was confused. She came along and she sat with sadness. And in there, something happened. When we sit together with another person, regardless of what their feeling is, we experience presence and like being known and seen and valued for who we are. And that is something that God is always seeking to do with us. He wants to connect to us. We see patterns throughout scripture of Him wanting to connect to our heart and to know us at deep levels. And as I've done a lot of healing and kind of undoing some of the distorted ways of seeing scripture and God in ways that choked me rather than experiencing life with Him, I realized something. Like, as I'm reading about even just the joy of the Lord is my strength, which is actually in Nehemiah 8, verse 10. I think it's verse 10. Let me double check. Yeah. And it's Ezra speaking, and he says, do not grieve because of the joy of the Lord is your strength. And it can be really easy in that verse, and then once before where he says, do not mourn or weep, to think that we can't have any sadness. We must have the joy, right? Sadness. We must have the joy. But I don't think that's what's actually happening here. What I see in those scriptures, and then later in John 17, we see it in Acts 2, is God's presence and power and truth and grace, all of who He is, that shows up with us, that gives us strength. We have joy inside of us because of all of who God is with us. He does not leave us. He provides these things for us. So in Nehemiah 8, they're noticing things where they're hearing the words of the law and they're realizing that they haven't been obedient and those types of things. And maybe their focus was a fear of disobedience and maybe feeling fearful because they didn't feel that connection to God, and there's a sadness tied to it. And then God's presence comes along with us, and he comes to us in all of these different forms. Like, we can experience him in these different emotions through the gift of presence, right? Remember, it was sadness that showed up with, I forget this guy's little bing, bing, billabong, bing bong, bing bong, bing bong. I don't remember the name, but showing up in that presence. And so then I look into John 17, 9 through 13 says, I pray for them. I'm not praying for the world, but for those you have given me because they are yours. This is Jesus praying. He's saying, everything I have is yours, and connecting to the Father and talking about his disciples and really all of us. Like, he is like our mediator, right? And he says in verse 13, now I'm coming to you and I speak these things in the world so they may have my joy completed in them. Christ knew the joy of God's fullness of being and power and presence and love, and which includes truth and grace, and that brings about joy. When we're isolated and alone, and when we're focused on fixing it all for ourselves and trying to get joy, we're going to feel more disappointed. We're going to not experience the joy that God actually has for us because we're trying to make it happen rather than experiencing it happen with him. So I want to close in Acts 2, 22, verses 25 through 28. For David says of him, I saw the Lord ever before me. Because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. Moreover, my flesh will rest in hope, because you will not abandon me in Hades or allow your Holy One to see decay. You have revealed the paths of life to me. You fill me with gladness. In other versions it says joy in your presence. We have joy when we're experiencing God's presence, and that can happen just through our direct connection with him or through connection with other people. And the ways that God brings about events, we get to experience God's presence and his gift with us, and that reignites our spirits and our hope within us with this joy that comes from the Lord. I hope that blesses you and maybe releases you from the burden of figuring out just trying to get more joy. It just doesn't really work. But the joy of the Lord is something that we can experience as we experience God's presence with us. And I pray that you get to experience more of that today. Take care.